Right. So how do you, first of all, how do you size up this threat of Russian forces on the Ukrainian border? I mean, there's a sizable buildup there. It looks like the Ukraine's army general, Ruslan Komchak, has said that there are 28 battalion tactical groups on the eastern border and in the Crimea, and that's around 25,000 troops.
Three things. First of all, this for sure is a test of the Biden administration. President Biden, I was happy when he had his first phone call with President Putin, and he tells President Putin, Ukrainian sovereignty is a priority for the United States. I mean, that's a policy statement. We don't have a strategy for the Black Sea region yet, but that was an important policy statement. So I'm sure that President Putin is testing out, okay, how high a priority is it actually? What are you really going to do? Secondly, the what's happening in Ukraine on the border with these tactical groups you're talking about, of course, is not in isolation. Within the same week, we had 10 different intercepts by NATO aircraft from the North Sea, the Baltic Sea, down to the Black Sea. And reports are that these intercepts were a little bit more sophisticated and longer duration than the normal kind of airspace violations or the kind of reactions. And then, of course, at the same time, you had these three Russian submarines all came up together through the ice up in the Arctic on an impressive demonstration of capability. And, you know, this was not a coincidence that all these things happened at the same time. The third thing to keep in mind, of course, is that not only are Russian troops on the border, but they still illegally occupy Crimea, and they've increased. Everybody saw the video of self-propelled howitzers crossing that big bridge across the Kerch Strait into Crimea, and they still are killing Ukrainian soldiers in the Donbass. So I think this is all an attempt to put pressure on the Biden administration, to put pressure on President Zelensky, and perhaps it's preparation for a large exercise, or it's preparation for something else.
Let's talk about something else.
So the problem is that the Russians refuse to be transparent. They call big snap exercises that clearly should, in accordance with Vienna documents, require them to notify everybody and to invite observers. They never do that. They are not in a meaningful way, and they intentionally do this without any transparency. And this is where Germany and France should really be cranking up the pressure on the Kremlin, hold them accountable, but they never do, unfortunately. The something else, though, could be the beginning of additional military operations in Donbass. I don't think that's likely. What I do think is a possibility is a movement to seize this canal that brings water from it used to bring water from the Dnipro River down into Crimea. As soon as Russia seized Crimea, Ukraine blocked that canal, turned off the water flow, and so there is a water shortage in Crimea. The Russians are using this as a pretext, calling it a humanitarian crisis, and we may have to do something about it. And that would not be a surprise if they were to do that. So perhaps all this other stuff is a distraction as they make preparations to seize this canal, which really is not about water. It's more about increasing their hold on southern parts of Ukraine. And I think Odessa is the ultimate objective, to completely isolate Ukraine from the Black Sea.
Can we talk about NATO for a minute? NATO goes on a high state of alert. Why? Ukraine is not a NATO country.
Well, it was EUCOM, U.S. European Command, that raised the watch level, which got my attention. Now, what does that mean? Of course, raising the watch level means more assets are paying attention to what Russian forces are doing in the region. It moved Secretary Austin, Secretary Blinken, and the president all to continue to assure the Ukrainians, we are with you. President Biden had his call with President Zelensky finally. I think that that's noteworthy. And the fact that Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, of course, reached out to his Ukrainian counterpart and to his Russian counterpart.
But what would the U.S. European Command, under orders from President Biden to support Ukraine, do? I mean, they would not move forces into Ukraine, would they? Although they're doing some training there.
So it's a great question. You're right. Ukraine is not a NATO ally, so there's not a Article 5 type situation. And I'm personally interested to see what does this higher priority mean? I think 4 or 5 things could happen and should happen. Designate Ukraine as a major non-NATO ally, for example, which would free up more opportunities for training, for information exchange, for providing equipment, things like it makes it easier to do that sort of thing. And it elevates Ukraine to a different sort of level. That would be one thing. The second thing would be an affirmation that the United States will continue to support the training mission, what's called JMTGU, Joint Multinational Training Group Ukraine, out in the Yavoriv Training Center in Western Ukraine. We will continue doing that. An offer to expand training infrastructure at other Ukrainian training bases. So there may or may not be a show of force or something like that, but I don't think those would be particularly useful, because Russia knows that just because you had a B-1 or B-2 bomber or something fly by or whatever, so what? What would be more significant is increases in military aid and exercises, something like that. But I think long term, declare, for example, in addition to the Sea Breeze exercise we do with Ukraine every year in the Black Sea, we're going to connect the Saber Guardian exercise we do in Romania and the Noble Partner exercise we do with Georgia with Sea Breeze, and have a large Zapad-like exercise every year that's joint multinational to demonstrate that this area matters to us. The real weapon, though, or leverage, is financial. And this is where I think the previous administrations have stopped short of shutting down major parts of Russian banking systems. We've done sanctions, but we haven't inflicted severe pain on the oligarchs. And I would imagine that they would be considering something like that, so that if the Kremlin did something more severe, that would be a lever, and even the Germans would have to act on that.
Is the West only giving money, or we're in there selling arms and supplying arms already, are we not?
Yeah, sure. The total amount each year is somewhere between $400 and $500 million. So we have provided equipment, night vision devices, counterfire radar, and of course, under President Trump, the decision was made to provide javelins. So what's referred to as lethal aid, actual weapons.
Those are anti-tank weapons.
Best anti-tank weapon in the world that a soldier carries, and very effective. Now, these are not deployed along the front line. I don't know what the exact rules are for control, but they are kept consolidated back somewhere by Ukrainian forces. The counterfire radar has always been a very useful, popular bit of aid, because it can not only provide early warning of incoming rockets or artillery, which is obviously useful, but it also helps tell where they came from, and so which is useful for counterfire. The medical care or equipment, secure communications, those kind of things, that's been the norm of what we've provided. You remember, Ukraine used to be the weapons manufacturer for the Soviet Union. I mean, that's where a lot of the stuff was actually manufactured.
BMPs, the APCs, even nuclear weapons at one point.
The Russian Navy today cannot manufacture what they need for ships, because it used to be manufactured in Ukraine. Certain propulsion systems, for example, helicopter components. Very interesting. And so it's not like Ukraine doesn't know how to do stuff. The birthplace of the legendary T-34 tank is in Kharkiv in Ukraine. I visited that factory. They're still making tanks. That was really cool.
Does President Putin of Russia have a legitimate beef here? He complains about constant NATO expansion. Ukraine has expressed interest in becoming a member of NATO. Russia sees NATO as a threat. into its sphere of influence. I mean, are we pushing Russia into a corner?
Uh, Absolutely not. He has no legitimate leg to stand on. First of all, people should ask, well, why is it that every country that was ever under the Tsar or the Soviet Union or in the Warsaw Pact went scrambling to join NATO at the first possible opportunity? What is it about their history that tells them we want to be in NATO and we want to be in the European Union? What is that? And nobody's knocking on the door of the Kremlin saying, "Hey, please let me back in. You know, change my mind." Nobody, not even the Russians that live in Estonia and Latvia, want to go home, if you will. For sure, the Russians have always felt like they had to have to protect their frontier. The problem is in the 21st century, you can't use force. Well, you can, but you shouldn't use force to change boundaries and to decide what other countries are going to do. And that's what they have done. They've occupied 20% of Georgia. They've occupied part of Ukraine. They have troops sitting in Transnistria. All of these things, and now they're back into Belarus. This is all to make sure that none of those countries is able to join the EU or NATO. That's their objective, to keep that sort of non-NATO, non-EU presence on their borders. And of course, they don't want their own citizens who have suffered under decades of Russian or Soviet leadership to see how much better life is when you have those kind of freedoms.
All of this started in 2014 when President Yanukovych, who was President Putin, campaigned openly for Yanukovych at one point. There has always been a tug of war in Ukraine with Russia over influence there. And when the Maidan Revolution happened in 2014, Yanukovych was forced to flee. He is in Russia now, I think, as we speak. Russia turns it back, though, and it says it was Ukrainian aggression in the east, and that this is a natural grassroots uprising by rebels in the east. They are trained by Russia. They are helped by Russia to some extent, but they say it's a domestic situation in Ukraine, and that they are merely peacekeepers there. What's your take on what is the reality?
So Russia is anything but a peacekeeper or innocent bystander when it comes to Donbass. That's a total fairy tale that they would like everybody to believe, and unfortunately, Berlin and Paris tend to kind of look the other way or sort of tolerate that. Yesterday, the German foreign ministry, for example, called for both sides to de-escalate. Like, where both sides de-escalate? The Russians are the ones that are inside Ukraine. So that feeds the Russian narrative. And of course, Russia is putting out the civil war that's happening in Ukraine. It may spread towards the border, so we may have to do something. Again, total BS, fairy tale, but it's how they kind of try to set the conditions as a pretext to then go in and do something about it.
Which they did with Georgia. There was all of that media stuff with Georgia leading up to right. Russia pushing into Georgia.
And for sure, part of what's been going on is they're trying to provoke President Zelensky to direct that the Ukrainian forces do something to counter it. That would be, then the Russians say, look, we have to protect ourselves, we have to protect Russians, et cetera. Now, not even a brand new second lieutenant believes for a minute that what the Ukrainians are fighting against in the Donbass are just, rebels or militants or separatists. That is, again, this is more of the total fairy tale. Just think about it, the amount of equipment and ammunition and what's being used, the capabilities that the so-called separatists have is not something you can put together in a barn or in your mother's basement. I mean, this is state supported. And of course, because the Russians do not allow the OSCE to do their job, the border, the official border between Russia and Ukraine is absolutely wide open. And so is just convoys all the time. And there's so much imagery that's out there showing Russian equipment and troops all throughout the Donbass.